Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's March 4th, 2022 program. Welcome to everyone here and those listening. This is the 22nd program in our 2021-22 programming year. I'm Katie Piercy, I'm the City Club President, proud to be so. Support for the City Club is provided by our members and sponsors. You can become a member of the City Club at our website, cityclubofeugene.org. I'd like to intersect here and say, because I feel kind of passionate about this, as probably everybody does right now. So I'm just going to add to this little meeting today and just start out by saying, I'm with Ukraine. You can't help, as you go about your daily business, to think about people who are enduring what they're enduring in other parts of the world. It's good for us to remember. This program is streamed live to our YouTube channel and archived there and on our Facebook page. Our programs are always available on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page. And our podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Programs are broadcast on public radio station KLCC on Monday nights at 7. We have both business and in-kind sponsors. Our diamond sponsors are Kaiser Permanente, University of Oregon, Peace Health, and Lane Community College. And we get generous support from the City of Eugene and from Lane County. Our format today includes a question and answer period with City Club members and non-members alike via live stream and text. The texting number to submit your questions will appear at the bottom of your screen during the intermission and the question and answer segments. Speakers for today's program, Adult Mental Health, Trauma, and Care, are Dan Isaacson, Co-Chair, Suicide Prevention Coalition of Lane County, Bridget Byfield, Community Resilience Project and retired Child Welfare Supervisor at Lane County, Dr. Maureen Zalewski, Associate Professor and Director of Clinical Training, U of O Department of Psychology. Biographical information on our speakers is available on our website, cityclubofeugene.org. I'd like to thank Karen Knutson for coordinating today's program, and now I'd like to invite Joel Korn to the podium.
Today's program is the second of two City Club programs dealing with mental health. This program focuses on adult mental health. Children's mental health was the topic of a program on February 11th, 2022. That program can be viewed at the City Club of Eugene YouTube channel, Facebook page, and on our website. Trauma refers to an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual, physically or emotionally, harmful to or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects. Event, experience, effects are often referred to as the 3 E's of trauma. The National Council on Mental Well-Being reports that 70% of adult Americans have experienced some type of trauma at least once in their lives. In public behavioral health, over 90% of the clients have experienced trauma. Experiences become traumatic when they overwhelm a person's ability to cope. Traumatic experiences may be acute, chronic, or complex. A single event, a long-term experience, or a layered, cumulative, and intergenerational wound. Among the difficulties, stresses, griefs, and heartbreaks of the past several years, many adult Americans have weathered traumatic events in the context of the global pandemic. While some adult mental health metrics have clearly worsened due to COVID-19 pandemic, others are simply expressions of pre-existing, unresolved health challenges. Our speakers today will share insights to current adult mental health metrics in Lane County, the emergence of trauma-informed care, as a practice and strategies that can help support greater resilience, recovery, and growth. Our first speaker is Dan Isaacson.
Well, thank you very much. Can I do this without? Okay. I'm most especially thankful for City Club for talking about an issue that is incredibly important in our county. I'll get this up here, thank you. And also to be able to do this in person. I am so excited to actually see real life friends in life as opposed to on Zoom calls. I read an article in the New York Times Magazine not too long ago. It was about how the elephants in Africa are going mad, raping rhinoceroses, killing one another, stampeding without provocation. These intelligent, sensitive giants have become very, very disturbed. The cause, they believe, is overwhelming, unrelenting trauma, stress, be it poachers shooting at them and their families or land development squeezing and destroying their habitat, profound and irreversible changes to everything they know about their world, everything about what it means to be an elephant, and it's driving them mad. Elephants aren't being elephants anymore. Up is suddenly down. That's what COVID has been like for a good number of our population. Up is suddenly down, down is suddenly up. The virus hit us like a smart bomb, targeting everything and all the weak points that we as a society have been neglecting here in Lane County, across our state, and across the country. Truth be told, we're not good at recognizing an exponential growth of an existential threat. We went into the pandemic in trouble. Oregon ranks not near the bottom, we are the bottom in national mental health care funding. Couple that with the 4th highest homelessness rate, the 17th highest rate of adults in poor health, and the #1 use of methamphetamine, and we begin to get an idea for how one impacts the other. We rank 2nd in the country for addiction and last in treatment. 20% of Oregonians suffer from either addiction to alcohol or drugs. That's 1 in 5 Oregonians. During the pandemic, we saw a 70% rise in overdoses, a 30% rise in homicides, an 8% rise in domestic violence. And here in Eugene, we saw a 40% rise in hate and bias crime last year alone. Elephants aren't acting like elephants anymore. It shifted everything we know about how we live, how we communicate. It changed how we work and even how we mourn, with most funerals happening virtually or being postponed indefinitely. Those of us who don't fall into the above categories have labored to find reason and purpose within the fog of this thing. And there have been glimmers of hope that have shined through. The suicide rate here in Lane County prior to the pandemic is 4 times greater than 84% of the counties in the country. I'll say that again. The suicide rate here in Lane County is 4 times greater than 84% of the counties in the country. So when COVID began, we braced for the worst. The Suicide Prevention Coalition of Lane County got to work, training over 900 members of our community to serve as a mental health neighborhood watch. Aside from the usual suspects like social workers, teachers, healthcare providers, we trained taxi cab drivers, construction workers, and bank tellers because of those folks who know their community very well. We focus on city and rural communities just as much as everybody else, and we figured that it was the baristas who serve coffee in the morning and the bartenders who serve beer at night that know their community better than most. Suicide rates are evenly split between rural and urban here in Lane County, but the services are anything but. Almost all of what's available in terms of mental health care, counseling, and even support groups are located in the Eugene-Springfield area. But if you live in Lowell or Blue River or Mapleton, there are almost no services at all. It isn't surprising that with one of the highest suicide rates in the nation, if you live in places like Junction City, Florence, or Cottage Grove, the suicide rate is even more, despite the state psychiatric hospital being right down the street. COVID forced us into our homes and gave notion to the Zoom call. Because our concentration was no longer diluted by our line waiting, our commutes, our daily lives, that took us away from the richness of our acquaintances and loved ones, we began to find solace in the networks we already have. Our folks noticed that a 70% increase they had with folks in their immediate network during the lockdown, albeit virtually. The results here and around the nation saw a reduction in suicide in 2020, the first in decades, in what experts call the halo effect, a rare event that occurs usually with national tragedies where everyone feels united toward a common foe. The last time this happened was in 9/11 in Pearl Harbor. But I and others believe that it is proof that the human element is real, that the connection between us is something that you can actually track, and its effect on the social capital of a society can predict how it will fare in the face of every metric we use to judge the health of a community. Those areas that had pre-existing roots, that fostered methods of keeping people tethered to one another, and had simple things like broadband internet access, had markedly lower upticks in things like overdose, homicides, thefts, and even COVID relief fraud. The things that bind us saved us, and we learned. Parents learned that their teacher's job really is very difficult. Companies learned that their employee location isn't necessarily tied to productivity. The public learned how important it is in knowing who your neighbor is. And we all learned just how fragile our mental health care system is. Our purpose in this dynamic age must be to change, and to make change our friend and not our enemy. Our shared future must be one that learns the importance of mental health care, dismantles the stigma around it, and revives the connection between equal opportunity, shared responsibility, and the faith that we can all overcome even the darkest of yesterdays. COVID has been equal in its pursuit of us, but it sure wasn't equal into whom it ultimately found. Not everyone could stay home, stay distanced, and stay safe. A friend of mine told me a story. He's a local contractor here in town, and he had a couple come in a few years ago, very nice, very polished, very upscale, who wanted to complete the home that they had been working on because the first contractor that they had hired had embezzled almost $400,000 from them. So they got to work putting up the plans, and then they kind of dropped off the radar for a couple years. She came back. The couple had by then divorced, and she wanted to complete the house. Over the next 2 years, they spent developing and finishing this absolute magnificent mansion, 12,000 square feet, just up the road from here, set on the river. They were just about to put the finishing touches on this house when the Holiday Farm fire came through and burned it all to the ground. She was obviously devastated and considered walking away with whatever the insurance company would offer. But my friend and her sat down and worked through the best way to make her whole, finished the project, they went on their way. About a year and a half later goes by, and he runs into her again at Albertsons. This time, she's disheveled, she's unkept, something is clearly wrong. And he asked her, "Is everything okay?" She said, "No." He said, "Well, what's going on?" "COVID." It turns out his client is a local emergency room physician. And while she took the realities of someone embezzling a part of her life savings, the divorce of her husband, the destruction of her dream property to a natural disaster that's once in a lifetime, and the ensuing fight with insurance, it took only 14 months to destroy her with COVID. She said, quote, "I can't do this anymore. I can't listen to another family and tell them that their loved one is gone. I can't listen to another internet cure. I can't wade through wave after wave of need and pain and grief." The effects of those who have been standing in the gap throughout this aren't yet realized and have yet to be found. As COVID fades into our memory and our attention turns to the next pressing matter, it would be a mistake to lose sight of what we learned, who we learned it from, and the sacrifices so many gave to protect us, to heal us, and to keep the lights on. Trauma is a chronic condition, lingering far beyond our expectations, and as teachers, medical professionals, police officers, and others wrestle with where they fit in the new normal, we can support them best by seeing them, seeing not just the job they do, but the person inside, the human element, just as vulnerable as the rest of us. Like those African elephants, so many people over the past 25 months seem to lose themselves, seem to lose their innate sense of humanity. And if we want to regain it, we have to remember that unspoken bond that we all share and acknowledge it, nurture it, and invest in it. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Bridget and do a special call out to the Eugene Weekly article that we have out. It is an entire expose on what she's about to speak to. The TIP organization is a gold standard, shovel-ready mental health program that can be launched today. It is so valuable that the National TIP organization has offered a buy-in that they will pay for this entire year themselves if we can get the buy-in from both the city and the county to pick up the tab, and that tab is only $60,000. So I'd like to introduce Bridget, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Dan. Get this mask off here a second. Thank you for having me, and I really appreciate your interest in Lane County. I like the analogy with the, I'm gonna fix the mic there, with the elephants, because Trauma Intervention Program, which we'll refer to throughout this talk as TIP, is bringing elephants back to being elephants. So trauma is a first response program that's made of volunteers. Please take a moment and just think of someone in your life who you care about. Maybe somebody you've even kind of taken care of at some time. Maybe you're thinking of a parent, a child, a sibling, a friend, or maybe a neighbor. Okay, this is always hard for me to narrow down because I do have a lot of people in my life, but don't worry, we're not going to tell anybody who you picked. Nobody needs to know who it is. Just think of that person. Now imagine that special someone who will remain nameless has just witnessed or endured a life-altering traumatic event. Maybe Papa didn't wake up from his nap. Maybe there was a terrible car accident. Maybe your daughter's friend completed suicide, a child drowned, an overdose. Any number of life's tragic but all too common events have occurred. Last thought, you're not there. You're out of town. Maybe your cell phone was in a dead area, or you had that ringer on silence again. Your special person needs your support. This situation is referred to by the Trauma Intervention Program as that horrible hour. The horrible hour. To really understand the importance of what TIP volunteers do, you need to understand what is called the horrible hour. The horrible hour is that hour immediately following a tragic event. Many TIP clients have told us that this was the worst hour of their entire lives. There are 5 aspects of the horrible hour that make it a terrible time, and it makes it so important for a TIP volunteer to be there. First, the horrible hour involves a huge loss in a person's life. It may be the loss of a spouse of 50 years, the loss of a child, or the loss of a home. We experience losses as we go through our daily lives, but when TIP is called to help, it's probably a pretty big loss. Number 2, the horrible hour is something that our clients never planned for. They were taken totally by surprise. In many cases, we have been called have just made a terrible discovery. Say a woman just came home from shopping and finds her husband dead. That discovery just begins her horrible hour. The third aspect is those that we are called are not experiencing their horrible hour in a nice, quiet, familiar environment. Rather, the environment is often chaotic. It may be a noisy emergency department, or on the side of a freeway, or in a person's home with emergency personnel coming and going and all these strangers in their home. The fourth aspect, often the person is experiencing the horrible hour is alone. Loved ones haven't arrived yet. The people who are there might be emergency responders who seem to be very busy and serious, or well-intentioned helpers who say and do all the wrong things, or family members who they themselves are traumatized. The fifth aspect is the person experiencing the horrible hour is often asked to make dreadful decisions. What mortuary should I pick up my dead child? Should I donate his organs? How should I tell my child his father killed himself? Unfortunately, the person faced with these dreadful decisions does not have the experience, the information, or the clear thinking to make them. These horrible situations leave those who are called to assist devastated. Each person reacts differently, but it's very common for our volunteers to encounter people who are shocked, confused, shaking, sobbing, angry, guilty, and questioning. But the word which best characterizes the people that are we called to help is lost. TIP volunteers arrive to guide them through the worst hour of their lives. So what do these volunteers do? Well, first, they provide emotional support. They listen, they touch, they let the person know that you're not alone. Someone cares about you. Second, volunteers serve as protectors. If necessary, volunteers protect those from helping the unhelpful helpers and from the media, from the carnage, or from the consequences of their own forgetful or impulsive behavior. Third, volunteers are information advocates. They try to obtain information about the situation from emergency responders for those who desperately need it. Our volunteers function as educators. For example, they may explain what those who we are assisting are feeling is normal, or they may educate a parent about how to talk to their 5-year-old about the death of her father. Fourth, our volunteers help those they are helping by developing a simple plan that will guide them through the horrible hours ahead of them. This plan may include information about mortuaries, the coroner's procedures, cleanup services, and the practical things that need to be taken care of once a death has occurred. Finally, volunteers help our clients make the tragic event special and a personal event. Volunteers might help a client say goodbye to a loved one, or obtain a lock of hair, or retrieve a wedding ring. In summary, TIP volunteers walk into chaotic situations to help people who are alone and temporarily incapacitated. Volunteers serve as guides throughout what we've called the horrible hour. By providing the service described, the volunteers help traumatized clients regain a small sense of control in a very uncontrolled environment. While our clients are certainly nowhere near okay when our volunteers leave them, at least they have some information and support so that they can move forward. This sounds amazing. So what kind of program can provide for an entire county that would make volunteers be available for these situations? Is this really within Lane County's reach? So now I'll tell you more about TIP. Trauma Intervention Program, TIP Incorporated, was founded in 1985 and has a long history of establishing and operating successful community trauma response programs. We call these trauma intervention programs TIP since it was established, and 14 very successful TIP programs in our county. A list of all of our TIP chapters can be found at www.tipnational.org. The TIP organization and its chapters can bring to Lane County proven experience. Most of our chapters have been operated for more than 20 years. Experience working with first responders nationwide. In all of our TIP chapters, the requests for services are activated by emergency responders and hospital critical care personnel. The programs would not work without their strong buy-in. Although we have strong partnership with emergency agencies and hospitals in each chapter, TIP chapters are independent nonprofits and are not part of a government agency. Experiencing operating programs which respond on a 24/7, 365-day basis to create scenes, arriving with an average of 22 minutes. TIP provides services that are ethnically diverse communities, including in San Diego, Orange County, California, and Las Vegas, Nevada. TIP has demonstrated an ability to work within diverse communities. They have developed teams of translators to assist in serving these communities, and in many cases, the resources have been tailored to specific populations. The programs take a broad brush approach. Call us for anyone, anytime, any crisis, in any location. Each of the TIP programs work in collaboration with multiple agencies, including chaplains programs, social service agencies, mental health agencies, the Red Cross, and many others. These agencies are listed in a TIP resource guide that is given to every client served. In short, TIP has demonstrated the ability to establish community trauma response teams and operate them successfully. So what role will the TIP organization fulfill? The TIP organization has demonstrated expertise and experience in program design, volunteer recruitment, volunteer training, volunteer management, staff hiring and training, and program policies and procedures, training of hospitals and public safety personnel, program evaluation, private sector funding, and ongoing operation of local nonprofit organization. The TIP organization would provide all these services and functions. In summary, TIP volunteers support residents on the worst days of their lives. TIP makes city emergency response systems more efficient by freeing responders from scenes sooner so they can get back to service. Because TIP is a large group of volunteers, TIP can guarantee to emergency responders an average of 22-minute response time on that 24/7, 365-day basis, 100% of the time. TIP volunteers give TIP clients a comprehensive resource guide, and TIP has a critical incident resource team. TIP also has a Heroes with Heart dinner, has a bilingual response team. A TIP program increases the city's ability to respond to major incidences, whether it be a school shooting, a car crash involving multiple casualties, even a sudden death of a city employee. TIP is an important part of city's emergency preparedness plan. If a major disaster occurs involving casualties, TIP can mobilize many experienced volunteers within 1 hour of being dispatched. TIP has a diverse group of volunteers who can meet special needs of victims. For example, there are TIP volunteers who can sign, as well as TIP volunteers who are bilingual. Also, TIP has a large pool of female volunteers who can meet the needs of women who have been raped and victims of domestic violence. TIP gives residents of the community an opportunity to become involved in public safety and make a difference in the lives of their neighbors. TIP volunteers develop skills, confidence, and experience to help family members, co-workers, friends, and neighbors when tragedy strikes, even when the volunteers are not in their formal TIP roles. TIP plans for comprehensive crisis services that involve following essential components. Volunteer recruitment. TIP Inc. will conduct a rigorous volunteer recruitment campaign using social media, print media, the recruitment opportunities provided by Lane Public Safety Departments, posting of recruitment flyers, and encouraging active crisis interventions to recruit others through their work, church, and social network. Training. TIP will conduct 2 volunteer training academies in Lane County annually to train citizens to be crisis interventions. Quality control. Within 24 hours of every call out, the emergency responders who called for a TIP volunteer will be sent a Give Us feedback card with a request to return it to the TIP staff. These feedback cards will be reviewed, and if corrective action is required, TIP staff will take necessary steps to correct the issue. In conclusion, before coming to Lane County in 2006, I lived in Multnomah County and worked as a volunteer for TIP for nearly 8 years. I personally witnessed the value of this program and low and high-profile cases. I was sent here from Gresham to Thurston to meet the first responders who entered into the high school cafeteria, unsure if their own children and neighbors would be there. I will never forget their courage. I know the value of this program and to bring to our community. With TIP active in Lane County, that special person, think of them. They won't be alone. Thank you.
Thank you, City Club, for this invitation to speak about my work. I am Maureen Zalewski, and I'm going to be speaking about my perspective about parent mental health disorders, both before and during the pandemic. I'm an associate professor and the director of clinical training at the University of Oregon in the psychology department. I'm a licensed psychologist in Oregon, and I specialize in a treatment called dialectical behavior therapy skills training, both as a supervisor in the psychology training clinic and through treatment provided by my team. So let's reflect back on many of the pandemic headlines around parenting, including New York Times and other major outlets. Headlines included, "The pandemic is a mental health crisis for parents." "America's mothers are in crisis." This created a media platform revolving around parent, mainly mother, mental health. This attention focused on how the pandemic inducted a new cohort of parents, many for the first times in their lives, into the world of parenting while experiencing mental health symptoms such as crippling anxiety, depression, and stress. In the early phases of the pandemic, a national U.S. survey coming out of Vanderbilt of over 1,000 parents conducted in June 2020 found that nearly 27% of parents reported worsening mental health. This study and others also examined what types of risk factors were related to parents experiencing poor mental health. In their national U.S. survey, worsening of parent mental health was greater among females, unmarried individuals, and those with younger children. In addition, loss of childcare, change in insurance status, and current food insecurity were associated with worsening mental health for both parents and children. In my collaborative work at the University of Oregon on a large project called Rapid EC, we use a longitudinal sample of over 3,000 parents across the U.S. who had children aged 0 through 5 years old. The study identified parent mental health trajectories from April through November 2020, which was predicted by pre-COVID accumulation of risk and COVID-specific risk factors. Our findings demonstrated that 27% of parents reported persistently high or increasing mental health problems. Pre-COVID cumulative risk and financial strain, decreased employment, and increased family conflict were salient factors predicting these poor parent mental health trajectories. Taken together, these studies, as well as many others, document the rise of parent mental health issues during the pandemic, with acknowledging that certain social, economic, and family-related factors are related to this increase. As an academic researcher and clinician who provides treatment for mental health disorders in parents, and personally as a mother to two young children, I agree that the spiral of parent mental health during the pandemic has been unprecedented and newsworthy. However, I worry that as the pandemic ends, Americans may go on to brand this event as the parent mental health crisis in America, and in doing so, we will have ignored, or even worse, possibly obscured our understanding about the reality of this particular population and the reality of the issues. There is a difference between the parents who reported experiencing symptoms of emotional distress as a result of specific pandemic stressors, and those parents who have suffered from mental health disorders before they became parents and whose parenting is profoundly affected by those disorders, especially when treatment is hard to access, not available, or ineffective. Well before, as well as during the pandemic, millions of US parents are raising children while having a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, eating disorder, substance use disorders, personality disorders, schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, experiencing suicidality, or having chronic depression and anxiety. If not treated, these mental health disorders are highly distressing and impairing. And sadly, these disorders, when experienced by parents, remain stigmatized and poorly understood by the public. And yet, around 2/3 of adults with mental health disorders are parents, making the experience of raising children with a mental health diagnosis a far more common experience than most would realize. I would bet that every listener is close to a parent with one of these disorders, was raised by a parent with one of these disorders, or is a parent with one of these disorders. Part of raising awareness of the importance of parent mental health disorders is knowing what it means for their children. The data are clear that having a parent with a mental health disorder places children at risk for developing a mental health disorder across the lifespan. Chronicity, severity, multi-diagnoses, and the presence of other adversity will increase the risk for their children. Of course, some of these children will never go on to develop mental health disorders. Research points to protection that can come from the other parent, having more resources, or other types of support. And while all this is encouraging, we also need to remember that living disorder-free and psychological well-being are not the same. Many adults who had parents with mental health disorders report struggling with intimate relationships, self-esteem, self-control, or other areas of life. If raised by a parent with a mental health disorder that is not effectively treated, it is really nearly impossible not to be impacted. Now, really important point that I cannot underscore enough. This impact on children should not be wielded to shame these parents. Rather, this reality should serve as a societal wake-up call to prioritize the parent and family's treatment and care. While treating parent mental health is a worthy goal of its own, it needs to be recognized that treating parents stands to yield benefits for the mental and emotional stability of their children. An agenda of breaking the intergenerational cycle of mental health disorders within families will require addressing the mental health of parents. My team at the university is learning about how we can break the cycle of mental health disorders within families. One of our projects works with mothers with borderline personality disorder, a disorder marked by extreme difficulties regulating emotions. In a treatment for borderline personality disorder, what I mentioned before, called dialectical behavior therapy. Depending on their own history, these mothers, whether they initially realize it or not, are working to actively disrupt the intergenerational cycle of mental health disorders within their own families. For these parents, working hard in treatment on a long-standing and serious mental health disorder offers the possibility that they can break this cycle. In contrast, for many parents who experienced mental health symptoms during the pandemic, for some of these parents, they can expect their symptoms to recede with the pandemic stressors receding. So I ask to any parent listening who had that experience of having the troubling experience of parenting with mental health symptoms during the pandemic, can you imagine the impact it would have on you and your children if this went on for many more years? What if your thoughts and emotions were scarier and darker, your behaviors more out of control, or your basic sense of reality was unreliable or shaky? This is a glimpse of what million parents are experiencing while they raise their children. The parent mental health crisis gained considerable media attention during the pandemic, and this is great. But as the pandemic recedes, we must continue to pay attention to how prevalent parent mental health struggles were before the pandemic and how prevalent they are going to remain going forward. Parents with mental health disorders and their children need society's sustained empathy and attention. Thank you.
After those excellent presentations, I'm sure you have many questions. We'll take 5 minutes and come back to hear those questions. Thank you. Okay, welcome back to our program today. We're now at the question portion, and we have a question from Marilyn Milne.
Hi, thank you. So my question has to do with adverse childhood experiences. The Kaiser Permanente, one of our sponsors, put together a landmark study that showed that children affected by ACEs carry that, of course, throughout their lives. So is there anything, any studies or research going on or findings about how we're reacting to the pandemic based on adverse childhood experiences that we carry with us?
Yeah, that's all her. Yeah, we know who that one is.
So I don't know of a specific study, but the ACEs, for those who are not familiar with it, is it's a checklist that's widely used from a public health perspective that accounts for adverse childhood experiences prior to the age of 18. And interesting, just to link it to the work that I do, because I can speak to this, but 2 of the items are having a parent with serious mental health issues. The wording I think is mental illness, and then or a parent with a substance use disorder. So notice that those are 2 out of the 10 items on that checklist. You know, I think what the field is showing at large is individuals who have experienced an accumulation of adversity prior to the pandemic are experiencing generally worse outcomes during the pandemic. So that's sort of like a broad answer, but I do think a lot of research accumulates around sort of that pattern of findings.
Anyone else care to comment? Mary?
Hi, I'm Mary Layton, and I'm reading a question that was come in from the live streamed audience. My question is for Bridget. How are the TIP volunteers supported if or when they get traumatized or overwhelmed themselves from the work they are doing in a crisis situation, either during the hour or after they are done?
Thank you for that question. TIP has a very good support plan set up for volunteers. It's all part of their training. There's 60 hours of training to even become a volunteer. Then there's a monthly meeting where you check in. I spoke in my talk about a little card or a check-in after every call that you also put in with the team leader, so they make sure everything went okay, because oftentimes people don't even realize they were traumatized by a call until a little bit later they react different, or they get a little accumulative stress and have a weird reaction later on. So this is very closely monitored by the TIP team and all that work together. They don't take it very lightly when it's been a really high trauma call, and that one is debriefed as well. When a new team member comes on and a new volunteer, they also shadow someone who's been around for a while, and they have a long checklist of things to be watching out for, to notice if the trauma is starting to affect you, or if you're starting to react differently to things. There's several different signs that you're not quite handling things well, or that you're handling really bad things very well, but just to be able to recognize and how to deal with those. It's built into the program.
Our next question, please.
I have 2 questions. One is a little broader than Mary's question. How could we get TIP started in Eugene? What resources does it take in terms of money and staffing and willpower? And the second has to do with mental health resources. My husband is very involved in a program that provides free clothing to homeless families. And it's pretty evident from the behaviors of some of the families that they are under terrible stress, not just, the results of homelessness, also the multiple stressors, and parents need help. Where would they go? Could the volunteers call the Department of Health and get help? And if so, what kind? Thank you.
Which question do you want to answer first?
Well,
You take TIP if you want.
the first question on how we can get into Lane County, I'm going to share with Dan.
yeah.
The second question, one of the things that I come from in working with child welfare is I also chaired for probably, 10 years or something through Trillium, and it came a few different names and stuff, but it's basically the safety net of children and youth services, and a lot of also housing and food services for our county, and where we met once a month and just touch base so that we had that communication going on what was available. That is one of the things I absolutely love about TIP, because we have so many resources as a community that we don't know how to access, or that we get a real long waiting list on this one because we didn't know this one was available, or didn't know what the need was here or there, and our communication is not the best. Even I will take responsibility, because I worked on that for a good 8-10 years and I still don't love it. However, this is one of the things that TIP is awesome because it will have a list of all the resources in the community. And when they go to a call of a crisis, even in a homeless or a very mobile family, they will be able to provide them those resources and make those connections for them because they are going through those times of trauma and times also just difficult times. It provides more access for community projects and all of the services that are in this community and not utilized as much as they could be or as well as they could be. So Dan, do you want to, yeah. And I'll jump in, you know I'll, we know this, right?
So the total cost to start TIP here is about $60,000. And I really appreciate your question, Jane. $60,000 a year makes it countywide. The national program has offered to bring in their own funds to offset some of those costs, and there's also more cost savings by the fact that there are the existing death notification team through the district attorney's office, the police department, the fire department, coroner's office, who does this work as it is now. But those offices are frankly just not trained how to do this kind of work. And that the way that they perform it, I will tell you, I have been in that first hour myself. It was an experience I wouldn't wish on anybody. I don't know how Bridget and other people Dumbo drop into the worst moment of someone's life and do it repeatedly, volunteering every day. Not all heroes wear capes. But it is such a crucial element to not add that second layer of trauma onto folks as they are going through this moment of their life. On to the question about mental health services here. In the work that I've done in mental health since my friend's passing, I have got a lot of friends that I've grown to be introduced to around the country, and we accept that what we see around us is just normal. It's not. There are proven strategies that work everywhere else in the country that we could adopt here. One little statistic you might want to think about. In 1975, we had about 7,000 hospital beds for the psychiatrically disturbed. We have 600 now. The population has doubled in size. We have less beds, 90% less beds. And the predominant drug of choice is methamphetamine, which is a psychosis-inducing drug. A study that was done in the early 2000s showed that 11% of adults in Lane County suffer from enough psychiatric issues that they needed continual care. That's enough people to fill Autzen Stadium, and we have 620 beds. So I like to think about that, right? How can we navigate this? This is not something that's going to be solved by Lane County. It's not going to be solved by something, even frankly, that the state. It has to be a national push to make mental health care the same as heart care and kidney care and anything else, because it's the same bag of meat in between our head. And until we treat it as such, we're going to get the same results.
Where are we seeking the $60,000 from? Is that the county or the city or both?
Yes, it would be a kind of a partnership between the county and both cities.
And the odds for getting that money?
I don't know. We'd have to. I mean, I think it's fairly good. I mean, it's a relatively low amount of money. I mean, this is for their buy-in. If you wanted to.
I can speak. It's been my experience with most of the time, and what makes this the most effective program, if that amount of money and basically the amount that, it is 60 that they're talking, is maybe a 40,000 split between police, fire, sheriff, county, and hospital. That's hardly as much as it costs to wash the trucks. It's 12 cents per capita. Volunteers are spread throughout the county. That's why we could get somebody there in 10 minutes in Oak Ridge. So it's exceptionally cost effective. There is one paid staff, and that one paid staff works out of TIP National, so they're not paid by the county. Like I said, it's not a government entity. The rest is all volunteers. So.
Did we answer both of the questions? Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. I love the variety of expertise up on the dais. And my question is following on the one that we had before about resources. So I'm a recovering alcoholic and I suffer from chronic depression, but if you looked at me, you probably wouldn't have the same ideation of who I am and how I suffer from mental illness if you looked at members of our unhoused community. And my question specifically is how to be able to create partnerships with our business community. I'm a renter in the Whitaker, and our business community is stepping up in tremendous ways to provide mental health support services, particularly for our unhoused community. But I see them strained, particularly in the Whitaker and in areas of our community where we see the highest amount of need. And so I'm wondering, particularly with this resource question and some pushback from our business community about the payroll tax, how can we strengthen these partnerships to be able to get access to critical services that we know have an evidence base that supports them, while being candid about the systemic change which needs to take place? In my conversations with the business community, some of them are worried about the lack of quick progress, and it seems to me the type of changes that we're talking about are very long-lived. This has been decades in the making. It's going to take decades to resolve. So how can we work together with our business community to be able to advocate for more resources or perhaps more effective use of current resources?
Thank you for your question.
I'm a small business owner in the Whitaker. Thank you, Ian, for your question. I want to make sure that I'm separating from the official hat I wear to the opinion hat that I wear. I don't think anybody has the quote-unquote silver bullet. I think that part of the frustration from business owners that I'm friends with in the area is that the solutions seem to be focused mostly on them, when this is a holistic approach that needs to be solved by. Brittany is doing an amazing job with coming up with her own look at homelessness and unhoused in our community. But again, we'll use this as an example. I love Cahoots. I think Cahoots is an amazing program. I love the fact that it's being championed around the country as a model for how we bridge the divide between the police and mental health services. But the goal of every nonprofit should be looking for ways to put itself out of business, right? And the people that they are predominantly serving on the street are not people that they should be serving. They're patients. They should be in a hospital setting. And so until we start treating them as patients, until we start treating them and finding a solution so that they're not just constantly cycling between the ER, the street, and the jail, and substituting that for what we used to have, then we can continue to fund that side of the equation all we want, and it only increases until we actually start addressing the problem itself. And then Cahoots could actually start doing what its job is, which is to parachute drop into someone's life who's having a temporary moment of crisis, help them get back on track, and then move on to the next person. So is it the business community's responsibility? Yes. I have no problem contributing. I hope that more people do. I just think that it needs to be a holistic approach between a whole lot more audience on both the city, the county, the state, and the federal level.
Our last question will be from John Belcher.
Thank you very much. I learned a lot today, but what I don't think I've learned is if I get that call tonight that a loved one has committed suicide, for example, what do I do, especially for me when I don't have access to Cahoots?
I have a heartbreaking answer to you, but it's the reality. You would call 911. You would get a very compassionate, I would put my money on it, compassionate responder who would do their very best to tell you how sorry they were for your loss. They may leave you some information on a mortuary, and I would hope that you would have someone that you would know that you could call. I would not be able to guarantee it. I would wish that 911 person who responded would be able to say, I have a tip volunteer coming to help you get access to whatever you need. But right now, we don't have that.
So can I quickly follow up? Sure. How would it be different if we did have tips here?
Okay, if you did have tip, I will tell you from my own personal experience, my very favorite response was generally when there was a couple or family member who lost someone in their family in the night, or they just didn't wake that morning. And the emergency responder would come, and I would almost beat them there. That's a speed issue we won't go into. And as I would get there, I would ask you to tell me about your friend, your person. And we would have a beautiful conversation about your loves and lives together. We would talk about how precious that time is. We would take our time to say goodbye. And we would talk about what we have to do next, and more importantly, what we don't have to do next. And then we would talk about who would you like to be with you at your side now? And I would find my replacement. I would not go until that person was there or you were ready for me to go. And that's how it'd be different.
Thank you. I think we're ready for Kitty Piercy, President of the City Club.
Find my way up the stairs. Thank you. This has been our March 4th, 2022 program, Adult Mental Health, Trauma, and Care. Before we thank our speakers today, I'd like to recognize our diamond sponsors. Kaiser Permanente exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information is available at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. Get more information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond. As your hometown healthcare partner for more than 80 years, the Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy. Learn more at peacehealth.org. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. We are grateful for generous support from the City of Eugene and from Lane County. I would like to acknowledge our Sapphire sponsor, Summit Bank. Support for the City Club comes from Summit Bank, your local community bank, an independent community bank headquartered in Eugene. Summit Bank serves businesses and professionals in Eugene, Springfield, and Central Oregon communities. For more information, visit sbko.bank. Today's gold sponsors are Drs. Fine, Hoffman, and Sims, and Hirschner and Hunter attorneys. Thank you to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, PAC Info and Simplified Computing LLC, and Dotson's Photography. And a special thank you to public radio station KLCC FM 89.7 for airing City Club programs on Mondays at 7. Our programs are always available on our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and our podcast. We invite everyone, members and non-members, to participate in our programs in person at our new venue, the First United Methodist Church at 1376 Olive, or by live stream on your YouTube page. More information is on our website, cityclubofeugene.org. Next week we will have a discussion of the effects of redistricting on elections. Here comes the election cycle. Please join us again on March 11th. More details and information about future programs can be found online at the City Club's website, cityclubofeugene.org. So right now, I would like to thank our speakers, Dan Isaacson, Bridget Byfield, and Dr. Maureen Zalewski, for a great program, very informative, really meaningful to all of us. Thank you very much. And I would like to take note, I think this is a hopeful thing, so I'll add it to the program. So in the midst of this conversation that we've had with two forums on mental health issues, University of Oregon is opening a new mental health center for children, something we need very badly, and I think it's a moment of real capacity building and change for the state of Oregon. You can all remember, it wasn't that long ago, when people who had mental health issues were flushed out into the streets. And they were promised there would be care in the community for them. Well, here we are, these many years later, really just coming to terms with what we haven't been doing and giving us great hope for what we can do together as a state and as a community. So thank you very, very much. And that concludes today's program. Be safe, Be well, be healthy, enjoy life. Thank you.